Let's challenge our limitations and promote our curiosity on education and so much more. This is the No Box Podcast with Dr. T.
Hey, is this thing on? Hello, everyone out there. Welcome to another episode of the No Box Podcast with Dr. T. That will be me. Today, I'm really excited, as I always am with our guests, but today, particularly excited to have two really amazing colleagues and friends and presidents here in the state of Illinois. We've got Dr. Kirk Overstreet, president at John A. Logan College. So welcome, Kirk. It's amazing to have you on. And Dr. George Evans, our president at Kaskaskia College. Just appreciate both of you gentlemen being on. Before we jump into some questions and some discussion and maybe a little bit of debate, let's start with you, George. If you can just give us kind of the Reader's Digest version of George's experience, career, and then we'll move over to you, Kirk, and then we'll just jump into some questions. So, George, let us know who you are.
Thanks, Ken. The best way to describe me is Forrest Gump. 17 years in higher education. I have 10 years of law enforcement experience. Coached high school football for 10 years, been a volunteer firefighter and EMT for 18 plus years, and was a private business owner early on in my 20s. So I kind of have a very well-rounded spectrum. Very proud Kaskaskia College graduate myself, class of 2000, and realistically kind of worked my way up through the chain from an adjunct instructor, teaching international relations and history, through some administration positions, through career and technical education, and then finally to the president's seat in November of 2017, and the rest is history.
Amazing. Thank you, George. Kirk.
Yeah, so really excited to be here, Ken. Thanks for inviting us today. So my pretty non-traditional career path like George did. I worked 15 years in electrical construction before I went back to college. I went back to community college and then went on and finished my master's degree in history. And taught history for a while and moved into administration early in the early 2000s. Worked at University of Illinois, Chicago for several years, about almost 10, before moving into the community college space. And moved into the community college space where I really love being and love what I'm doing. Had various roles in administration. Was up north at Northern Community College System, and then took this role as president in 2020. Started my role on January 1st, 2021, right in the middle of COVID. So it's been a really fun experience.
Wow. Fun experience. Okay, sure. Yeah. So thank you again, George and Kirk. So, today I really want to focus a little bit on this sort of future of education, future of the work that we're doing, particularly in community colleges, some of the nuances that we're continuing to face, whether that's from a legislative perspective, a policy perspective, or whether that's from kind of our internal perspective. So I'm gonna start off with maybe a little bit of a soft question here, like. What's something that really excites the both of you as presidents that's happening in education right now? And what's something that's really keeping you up a little bit at night, worrying you, weighing on you about the future of education? So what really excites you and what really worries you about where we're at right now? George, let's just kick it off with you.
So from an exciting standpoint, I truly believe that probably since the pandemic, it seems to me, especially on I'd like to think I have a pretty good pulse of Illinois politics, but also on the national level, that community colleges are finally getting their due because of our adaptability and flexibility associated with responding to the pandemic, but also to the labor needs that have shifted substantially since the pandemic. There's been a big crunch out there, and I think that we have, especially in Southern Illinois, have done a very good job of adapting what the industry needs are on a dime. And the workforce has changed. And so what scares me is the relevancy of higher education overall. Because of the changes in the workforce, you've seen a lot of heavy hitters locally, globally, that are no longer requiring higher education degrees for substantial paying jobs. So I think the scary thing is there's a relevancy question for us in the future. We have to adapt to what the industry is driving for, which is quick, fast, affordable, to meet their labor needs. They help care about our structure, our 16-week semesters, our 8-week semesters, or our 3 semesters in a year. They care about their bottom line and how they can get from point A to point B very quickly. And I think we have to adapt to that. I think we're in a position to do that, but it definitely keeps me sharp and cautious as far as making sure that we don't get stuck behind some type of, that's the way it always has been done, because we have got to change what we're doing in order to maintain our relevancy as a seat at the table for higher ed.
Thank you. Kirk, you want to follow that?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what George said. I think the what always has been exciting for me about what we do at community college is offer this ability for people to make change, to rethink their careers, rethink who they are, and we can do it in an affordable, quick way for a lot of people. I mean, I always take myself as an example, jumping back in after being out of education for 15 years and then jumping back into higher ed through community college was the way to go. And being a non-traditional age student, jumping back in and having those opportunities that the community college really afforded me. And then, that always excites me. I was just out the other day giving out scholarships to our high school students who are coming here next year. And that's a really exciting thing. And I'd said in the meeting, it's really great to be out there with some of the kids who are like, they've still got the new car smell, and they're on their way here, and it's exciting to see them. But I also really love this idea of being adaptable and being able to do many things for many industries and training people and getting our adult population back out here. And like George said, I think the thing that keeps me up at night is this sort of idea that going to college isn't important anymore, and that you can bypass college and just get a job. And our message, I think, always has to be, yeah, you can do that, but there's going to be a limitation on what you do. And I can exactly tell you that, and George, you might be able to as well. There was a limit, there was a cap where I was going to move in construction, and that was where I was going to be. When you have that higher education, you have the ability to move beyond that. And that might be workforce training, it might be retooling, but that's what we do. And that's what I love about what we do. So it keeps me up at night when people say that we're not relevant or that we're not needed anymore.
Yeah. So thank you both for those initial thoughts. So, obviously out there in the environment, we hear often of schools, colleges, universities really struggling. Not necessarily, it's not always all about enrollment or finances. Sometimes it may be about culture. It may be around sort of their ability to be innovative. But, I'm interested in both of your thoughts as you sort of sit as presidents and, we lead our respective institutions and we try, I think, to your point, George, maintain, I don't think just relevance, but a high level of relevancy, like an informed level of relevance to where we're aligned with workforce needs. We're aligned with this, which we'll talk about perhaps later, this generation of students that are coming through the pipeline that, again, want things now, the accessibility, how we've defined accessibility looks very different these days. But like, what's your thought on these schools closing? I mean, that's my question. Does that worry you? What do you think is behind all of that? What are you hearing in the environment?
Well, my hypothesis was this: you don't have to spend $150,000 on your education anymore to make a 6-figure salary. We're surrounded by manufacturing, healthcare providers, agricultural employers in our area that with a 2-year degree they're really the backbone of our region here at KC, and a lot of those employees do not have baccalaureate degrees, are making a very, very high-end wage. And you take that information there and you couple it with, well, let's be honest, there is a student loan crisis out there where individuals have borrowed substantially to earn a 4-year degree that hasn't necessarily turned into a very lucrative wage, and they're getting killed with interest payments. We see it all the time. We see people coming from us from a private liberal arts university that come to us to want to get a degree in nursing or something like that that's going to have a stable, above average pay. But we hear the stories that they just got married, had a kid, and they can't get a house because they're saddled with $100,000 in debt from a private liberal arts university. So that's scary. And I think the world is waking up to that, Ken, and the world is waking up to that, and parents and students are waking up to that, saying that you don't have to spend that much money on an education anymore to be successful.
So Kirk, any thoughts on that? And then I got a quick follow-up.
I think George hits it on the nail. There's a lot going on. I've got a daughter that's 28 and has $120,000 worth of debt left of her education, and she works. She loves her job. She works writing grants for a law firm, but did she need to get $120,000 worth of debt to get to that degree to make $60,000 a year? And there's got to be a switch and a change for that. I think that's what's the beauty of what we do with the community college, as far as allowing that cost differential to be such a better value.
So how do we take this affordability conversation? And I think as community colleges, we've always been affordable. We've always been flexible. We've always, I think, been relevant in the sense that we've always been there to serve the needs of our communities, to respond to our economy in ways that I think have kept us relevant. But let's look at this next generation, right? And George, I think you alluded to it in your introduction around, the 16-week, semester. I know some schools, we do it as well. We have a first 8 weeks, a second 8 weeks. Some schools have rolling timelines of when they start. But I'm interested with both of you, and you both obviously have heard me talk about this even at our president meetings across the state. I think both of you are on the CBE committee with the presidents, and we're really trying to look at what this next generation model looks like for education. So, in your opinions, this is probably going to sound like a really weird question, but what is holding us back from really being different going forward? Moving away in a more, maybe abrasive isn't the right word, but a more, hey, we have to pivot, let's pivot. I mean, right, this is what we're grounded in, this is what we're founded on, this is what we're known for. But yet for us sometimes, and I talk to presidents across the state quite often and across the country, and they have all sorts of reasons why, well, we could never do that. Otherwise, we would be looking for a new job. Or if we try to change that much, it's going to cause other issues. Yet, within their own institutions, they're struggling for enrollment. They're struggling for students to show up. They're struggling to maintain affordability because costs are going up. So what do you think is really getting in the way of community colleges being able to move or accelerate in a more acceptable way to really respond to the changing dynamics of, why do I need to spend $120,000? I'm going to go to a community college, but gosh, the community college still is sort of structured the way everything else is structured, and I need to work, or I have a kid, or I have to do some other things in my life. So kind of a loaded bunch of questions there, but what do you think is kind of getting in our way as community colleges to really move the needle on being more accessible and more agile in our own model? Mm-hmm. Any one of you can jump in.
I'll talk a little bit now, and I'm sure George can chime in. So, I don't blame them, but my bursar's office is a barrier, right? About how we pay, about how our students pay for their education. One of the things that we're working on here is developing a subscription pay. Students, getting away from this idea that you have to pay up or you have to pay and you can't come to school unless you pay last semester's off. We've got to get more flexible and get in tune with what the young people and people are used to doing right now. Everybody pays a subscription to Netflix and to Disney Plus and whatever you're doing, and it comes second nature. That's a barrier for us, the way we pay. And I mean, it's antiquated. It's the same way that we paid for college when we went to college. And it makes for a barrier for our students.
Thank you, Kirk. I agree. Every time I hear presidents exploring concepts like subscription pay, or creating more on and off ramps and programs, or I know both of you at a lot of levels are looking at CBE and looking at ways in which that can create that agility factor at a higher level is exciting. So George, let's hear from you, and then let's take a little break and come back, and we'll dig some more into these sort of ideas around where the future of this thing called education is going. So George?
Well, I think that's some great points, but change is hard. And you look at the education system in the United States, you're looking at 150 to 170-year-old institutional model that has been around for a long time. And everything that we do is built around that model, from K through 12 all the way up. The breakdown of the semesters, the Carnegie unit, the amount of hours associated with what equals to a credit hour. That change is necessary for us to change in order to move forward in the next generation of higher education. But change is hard. It's hard across several fronts. It's hard across our collective bargaining agreements, what defines a traditional full-time faculty member. But it's also hard from a success standpoint and what we define as success. My personal definition of success is different than the states and the Department of Education. Right. In my mind, let's say the Department of Education or ICCB, which I'm fortunate enough to sit on, it's not a critique, but definition of success is judged by enrollment growth, numbers, completion of certificates and degrees. Now, on the flip side, my personal definition of a success, if you take an individual from the eastern part of my district in Centralia and has very high unemployment, and we provide them a tangible skill set, that individual's been living off social services their whole life, and you provide them a tangible skill, such as enhanced, where they learn how to weld. And they not only do that, learn how to weld, but they do pipe welds, bends, aluminum welds, MIG, TIG across the board. And then they receive a credential within less than 6 months. Yeah. And that individual goes from living off of the system to earning a job with the Boilermakers, making $65,000, $70,000 a year. In my mind, that's the definition of success. They may not have a certificate or degree. They may have just completed 2 courses with us, but they have earned a skill set, and they have changed their entire trajectory of their life and their earning potential. And I think that's the other component here. From a national and state level, we have to redefine what success is too. And it's not necessarily associated with a 4-year, 2-year degree. It's changing that cycle and enhancing somebody's life from an earning potential, from a living potential, from a cultural aspect. Redefining that's just as important.
Yeah, I really think you hit it on the head there, George. It kind of goes to, and we'll go into a break with this thought, right? So redefining what success looks like, and something I've shared over time, and sometimes it may come off as this sort of controversial statement, right? We're community college presidents, we believe in education, we believe in the degree, but I often say that, my prediction is perhaps within 5 or so years, maybe sooner, I don't know if there's going to be a degree. I think it's going to be more about the credentialing. It's going to be more about the success, and that success being defined by what that student's expectation actually is, not a student saying, well, yeah, I went to, Kaskaskia, I went to John A. Logan, I went to Lewis and Clark, and I did what I wanted to do to get that promotion or to get this job, but I didn't earn, as we have it defined now, as a credential. So I think we really need to think that about that concept a little bit differently. So let's take a quick break, folks. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back with George and Kirk, and we'll dig in a little bit more maybe about this idea of where the definition of the degree is going in the future of education.
Yo, what up? It's Mike Keith, the proud graduate of Lewis and Clark. I got my start in the radio program that put me on the path to where I am today. We still do radio, but now we're so much more. Podcasting, producing, and editing, not to mention new equipment, studios, courses, and a new name. If you want to work in professional media or create better content for the things you love, do like I did and discover your path at Lewis and Clark Community College. Enroll today at lc.edu.
Welcome back to the No Box Podcast. With me today is Kirk Overstreet and George Evans, talking about education and where it's going. And the next topic is one, I've kind of likened it to the mall, right? We don't see a whole lot of malls anymore. And so I compare it to sort of saying the degree, like where is the actual degree going? So fellas, let's think about that. Is the death of the college degree before us sooner or later? What do you think?
I think the interpretation of the degree is before us sooner than later. And I mean, the interpretation, it's if I'm an HR director or a plant manager or the boss of a Fortune 500 company, I don't necessarily know if the weight of that degree carries as much as it did 3 years ago, or versus a resume that's built on strong communication skills, some proven experience, publications or project leads, something that can be more tangible is, in my mind, is gaining more traction and relevance from an HR standpoint in hiring the next generation of the labor force. So didn't necessarily answer your question directly, but that kind of gives you an idea that I in my thoughts is the degree doesn't mean as much to employers as it has in the past.
That's yeah. Before we jump to you, Kirk, I recently was meeting with a workforce partner, and the question was, I need to, which we probably all hear this. I have a group of employees I need to get trained on X, Y, Z. Some of them have degrees, some of them don't. Can you help us? Yes. The other question of that is, who's in your program that we could hire now? We don't necessarily care if they've finished yet. And it brought us to this conversation around we're interested in hiring people who are competent, not necessarily somebody that has, a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree. And then, the point there is, hey, maybe in a year down the road, I send, Kirk, George and Ken back to Lewis and Clark or back to Kaskaskia to gain a few more levels of competency so they're able to work on a new project or perhaps get a promotion they've been going after. So that's an interesting point too, George, is it's more about hiring somebody who's competent, who's well-rounded necessarily, rather than necessarily somebody who has, 17 degrees and, all this other stuff. Because believe me, I'm sure we all have it. And this is not meant to be negative, but I'm sure, all of us has probably interacted with folks who have high-level skills and competency who we'd rather have on the team versus somebody who has the 2 degrees and 4 years of experience. You know what I mean? So Kirk, thoughts on where this degree idea is going and what that looks like to you moving forward?
Yeah, and I think we've been going down this path for a long time, Ken, with micro credentialing, right? Mm-hmm. So I think IT was the first real big place that we saw a lot of micro credentialing coming through. You went to Microsoft training, you went to Cisco training, you went to Adobe training, and you added all these little pieces on that increased your ability at the office to do the work that you were doing. And I think that's what we're talking about when we talk about CVE, when we talk about George talks about people getting hired before they're even done with a credential. Yeah. And I think moving in that direction is where we're headed. But on the other side of that, and I'll go back to my humanities training back, a little bit. What I worry about with that, I think that's great. I think it's good that we can be pivoting and we can get those micro credentials. But what I worry about is where do we build these soft skills and the long-term public good skills, the civil servant skills, that humanities background that helps people be a well-rounded individual, not just somebody with a skill. So that worries me a little bit. While at the same time, I completely understand what the industry is looking for and getting I can't keep a welder in class. They get TIG done, they're hired. They come back from MIG, and I want to see that too, where they're coming back and getting those micro credentials, or they're out in the workforce, the credential, that information back, and we do CBE for them, and we get them that credential or that micro credential. But I do have that worry in the background of how do we help them be critical thinkers too.
Yeah, that's a good point. I almost want to say, well, who's responsible for that? Is that something that should be happening during those more formidable years, right? In the low teens or even before that, where you're really sort of instilling the value systems into youth and into young people, and as they move forward through this educational sort of continuum, the skill building and the competency building is really being complemented by having a strong social skills, or having the ability to interact with people that may completely disagree with you, but you're able to walk away saying, yeah, I don't really agree with Kirk, but I kind of get his point, and I appreciate him being open with me. I feel like that's one area that, probably right with you, I worry that is this next generation going to be able to not just be tolerant, right? I mean, that's like, we can all be sort of tolerate this and tolerate that, but to be open and curious as to like the differences we have and how that can really build better society, better educational models, et cetera. So next question, right? So right before the break, we talked about, we've been working sort of off of this 100-plus-year-old model of education, the Carnegie model. We look at things like financial aid, and there continue to be these sort of nuances. Well, that doesn't really apply to a student who might be approaching a program in a micro-credentialing perspective, or going down a CBE pathway as those continue to evolve across community colleges. There's the group of that we call our faculty, right? I think we all agree that our institutions cannot operate without everybody on our team, but our faculty are the ones that deliver the product, right? They're the ones that basically are the subject matter experts. The support systems around them are all critical to these processes as well. But I have found in talking to schools across the country and thinking about this in my own perspective, and having worked really closely, and I think well with faculty across my career, is that, it's easy to say, well, faculty can really get in the way, right, of us being able to implement new models of access and innovation, because that affects the definition of faculty work, or it's different. Well, I'm only used to sort of teaching this way or that way. Like, I'm interested in a little bit of a chat around what you all feel about the role of faculty in supporting the evolution of our access models as educators and as educational institutions. Like, what are your thoughts on that sort of idea, fellas?
I think it's a great question, Kirk, and I think our Dr. Trosk, I'm sorry, but I think it really depends on the generation where that individual was educated themselves. People tend to stick with what they become more familiar with versus change and adapting. I know that we all are part of the CBE side of the house, and I have seen firsthand that a lot of our newer faculty that are within 5 years of employment are much more adaptive, much more embracive of changing the changes in higher education versus the seasoned faculty member, some wonderful, wonderful people who are, in better terms, set in their way, in the way of the course delivery, which they feel has been very successful, which I more than likely agree with them. It's probably been very successful over the years. And they come from the mindset, if it's not broke, don't fix it, versus us having the understanding of the overall big picture, knowing that the world moves in an adapt or die type, that we have to pay attention to what the changes are in the future. So I think part of it is to find your champions who embrace it and have your champions lead the way. And when it comes to them having to really comprehend and see there's nothing hidden behind this. This is really the future, and I want to be part of it.
That's great. I agree. I think, we're really fortunate here. I think, like all of our institutions, right? We have folks that jump right in. We have folks that are super open, and we have folks that are sort of, in the corner with their arms crossed, still saying, and then over time, those folks might warm up. But then you always have that group that's like, I'm not really sure I'm interested in changing. I never feel that those folks aren't in and invested, but it's just like it's working for me now the way I'm doing it. I think the bigger question with that is, well, it may be working, but the expectation of the environment, or what I've often called the requiring environment, the environment that we work within and around is seeking from us new solutions. It's like you alluded to, Kirk. It's like hey, let's look at subscription pay. So our students have another vehicle to pay for their education. But Kirk, what are you thinking and seeing and feeling around the role of faculty in terms of driving some of this change that we need to see?
Yeah, one of the really interesting concepts, and you and I have actually talked about this a little bit, so is this idea of changing the salary structure for our faculty. We base our salary structure and our CBEAs on how many classes they teach per semester and per year. And instead of saying, hey, your value is this amount, like we do when we hire a welder or when we hire a teamster. And this is kind of the scope of the work that we think that we need to have you do for the year. And our expectations are you're going to help students transfer, go through this process. But it's not going to be in that old traditional, you're blocked into this class for 16 weeks with these 30 kids, and you're going to help them, you're going to do this model and get it through. That's a big, huge change, a mindset change for a lot of people. And I do think is what we're going to see that. We'll see that with some of our younger faculty that are coming along. I think they'd be more accepting of that idea. So it's finding some champions that might want to jump in and say, hey, I'll take a salary instead of, that works this way. And we'll change these expectations of how we go about teaching.
Yeah, I think it was at our last meeting we had, and I had made some comments at our president meeting, and there was an individual in that room, which I won't mention because they had shot me a text and said, hey, I'm really interested in being involved in all this work around CBE, and they've heard me talk, and I think all of us on this, George, you've alluded to, we've all talked about what these new models look like, and the response was, if I tried some of that stuff, I think I'd be looking for another job. And I said, well, what are you talking about? Well, my faculty would crucify me. And I said, well, do you have a good relationship with your faculty? And he's like, yeah, I think so. And I'm like, well, you have to start. I think you hit it on the head again, George, with this too. I mean, you both talked about this with having the champions. I said, go to those individuals that are champions, right? You're not saying, hey, next Tuesday at noon, the whole model changes. It's like find those individuals that can really help you help other faculty or other members of your team see this broader vision. So kind of moving that forward and thinking about the cultures of our organizations, right? And the culture of change and how that needs to be accelerated at some level beyond what perhaps it's ever been. What advice, this is my sort of final question, what advice would you lend to that next generation of president, right? That president who's teeing up to start in the fall of 24. It's their first presidency. They're, like we all were many, many years ago, super excited and fired up. And then you get in, you're like, okay, this was not what I thought, right? There's a lot more resistance and change is really difficult, even if we've been successful in our roles prior to that. What's the advice, gentlemen? What's the advice we give to our new presidents coming into this work, knowing that they're coming into work that is going to look very different within the next 5 years? What do you both think?
Well, I think first and foremost said that if I could go back and talk to myself 7 years ago, you're never, ever going to please everybody. So don't try. stick to your mission, stick to the institution, and just focus on your students. And if you can do that, you're ahead of the game. Knowing that you have to have a thicker skin here, that people will not see the same way that you are, but don't let that put a chip in your armor. Have that confidence in yourself to recognize that you're never going to make everybody happy, but have that confidence in yourself to believe that you're moving the institution in the right direction. That, and quite candidly, I would tell whoever was coming in the seat, you have to be transparent. Transparent accountability, they go hand in hand. If you can do that, I think you can lead by example. And those that you really want on your team will see that, and then they will become champions with you.
Beautiful advice. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I have there's a story I used to tell my daughter about Duck. Duck was out walking, and he fell down, and he got mud all over him and leaves, and it was raining, and he got all dirty and muddy, and Rabbit's walking by, and he sees Duck, and Duck is feeling really bad about himself, and he says, "Duck, what's the matter?" He goes, "Well, look at me, I'm all messed up. Everything, nothing I do is right. Nobody likes me. Look at how I look." And Rabbit says, "Duck, jump in the lake." And Duck, what? And he goes, "Just jump in the lake." Duck jumps in the lake. He comes out, shakes it off, and looks down in the water, and he looks fine. I think my advice to somebody that's coming new is to remember to be like Duck, and you got to realize that there's going to be a lot of stuff thrown at you. And but what's important is that we keep moving forward, and we keep champion change. That we're the biggest champions of what we're trying to accomplish, and what we do is, like you said, Ken, it's for our students and for our communities, and really building that and having that attitude with your team. I think your team picks up on that. So, and then the one other thing I would say is just, as a president, you've got to work your network. You've got to get to know guys like you, and have those conversations. And sometimes, just sit down and have a conversation like we're having today, and think of some things that might help us move forward.
Well said. Well, wow. Well, I just want to say thank you all out there listening to this episode, and I want to just give another very grateful thank you to both George and Kirk for sharing their wisdom, their perspective. As we all know, there are tremendous challenges out there for educators and education. And our opportunities ahead of us are only going to be as fruitful as I think the energy and the passion. And I think, as you said, Kirk, there at the end, being able to kind of brush the stuff off that might get in our way from time to time, or affect kind of the way that we're seeing ourselves as a sort of agent of the work. So maybe that advice taking from both of you for everyone out there is remain confident and focused on your purpose and your work, and know that you're in the role for a reason, right? You're in the role to lead at this moment for a reason. So with that being said, Kirk, thank you, my friend. George, thank you, my friend. You're both amazing. I look forward to seeing you both soon in person in the next month or so, and just appreciate you both. And I know that your institutions are better because of both of you. So thank you, and look forward to catching up real soon, guys. Thanks.
Thanks, Kirk.